In a world where female characters are frequently treated very differently from male ones, Project Moon is an outlier. Both in and out of universe, women in Project Moon are consistently presented identically to the way male characters are, as characters. In universe, men and women aren't treated differently based on their gender. In fact, neither sexism or racism seem to exist at all. Even when considering more inclusive or woke pieces of media in the modern day, they rarely treat gender in the way Project Moon does, by completely ignoring it. So how does Project Moon do this almost perfect abstinence from gender roles? The most obvious way they do this is the balance between male and female characters. LobCorp and Ruina's main cast are split almost 50-50. Guests in Library of Ruina most often come in groups of 3, and these always have a mix of genders, aside from one exception, the stray dogs, which is all male. This helps with the feeling that men and women are fit for essentially identical roles everywhere in the city. Whether you're a fixer, a syndicate member, a cannibal chef, or just a regular passenger on the train, neither the city nor the narrative cares in the slightest about what your gender is. I've been binge-watching House MD on Netflix. It's a very good show. In the first few seasons, the main cast is House himself, Foreman,
This vexes me.
Cameron, and Chase. The supporting cast includes Wilson, House's closest friend, and Cuddy, House's boss, but I'm not talking about them right now. I'm bringing it up within this context because Cameron, the only woman in the main cast, has romantic intentions with House and later dates Chase. I think that these relationships are interesting and well written, but the fact that 2/3 of the male main cast were technically involved with the only female member kind of illustrates a problem that exists in media. Platonic relationships between men and women are rare. Now, I should say that Cameron only goes on a single date with House. The feelings are one-sided from her end, and the actual romance that goes on between them is essentially non-existent. But there was at some point some romantic tension there. It's very rare to have a female lead and a male lead that doesn't end up having at least some romantic tension at some point. Project Moon is very different here. In the case of Roland and Angela, considering their chemistry, similarities, and the fact that Roland's late wife is called Angelica, I think a great deal of writers would make these two a romantic couple by the end of Ruina. Despite this, they remain only platonic by the end of the game, with the only reference to a romantic relationship between them being relegated to a single joke. Similarly, the other librarians aren't interested in each other that way. There's only a handful of romances between the guests of the library, and there's no romance between the sinners in Limbus Company, even in the many Mirror World variations of them, with the only exception of Sinclair possibly crushing on Faust in the Mirror World of Dawn office, and Rodion acting occasionally flirtatious with Gregor. Those are literally the only implications of any potential romance between the sinners at all, despite the genders being even out, allowing for all manners of heterosexual couplings if they wanted to do that. Romance in Project Moon is rare, with only a few characters having explicit romances in their arcs at all, which, in my Arius opinion, is very cool. I like it. I think it's cool. Aside from romance, characters are often free from traditional gender roles in narrative. Due to being games which involve violence, most of the characters that we know of are fighters, putting both men and women in a traditionally masculine role, but there are occasionally more feminine roles explored, especially in Cantos 6 through 9 of Limbus Company, which all have to deal with themes of parenthood and family. Don Quixote Sr., Nelly, Jiamu, and the Nurse Fathers are great examples of parental figures that don't follow the traditional roles of mother and father. Jiamu, for example, was the effective matriarch of the Jia family and the H-Corp as a whole. She controlled her kingdom through her work of making boluses, and is certainly not a nurturing figure to young Honglu, or to any of her other children or grandchildren for that matter. To contrast, a character like Rien, while still being manipulative, is a nurturing and caring figure for young Ryoshu, especially when compared to the other Nurse Fathers. He reads stories and plays games, and generally provides for most of her social needs before she starts going to school herself. The other Nurse Fathers certainly don't. Of course, these role subversions aren't groundbreaking in the modern day. They wouldn't have been groundbreaking 15 years ago either, but I'm highlighting them because they are a result of Project Moon's general stance on writing gender as a whole. Let's look at character designs now. Woohoo! I love character designs, yay! Most characters in Project Moon have a tailored look. Suits of various kinds are by far the most common attire that named characters have, male or female. Skirts, dresses, and more feminine clothes are much rarer, and generally only female characters wear them, with a handful of exceptions. That being said, in Ruina, male patron librarians can be equipped with key pages that have dresses and skirts, and these outfits don't change regardless. But what's interesting is that despite this, a handful of outfits do actually have 2 varieties. Can you see the difference? That's right, literally the presence of cleavage. That's it. The only key pages that have 2 varieties are ones where the source character has notable breasts and or cleavage. The outfits themselves don't change at all. Additionally, these varieties aren't called male or female, but option A and option B. This implies that men who dress feminine, while rarer than women dressing feminine, isn't exceptional or a social taboo of any kind. Outside of outfits themselves, there are an abundance of masculine women and feminine men. One of my favourite examples is Harold, one of the Hannah fixes near the end of Rowena. She has short hair, a thicker neck, and an outfit that looks more masculine. Despite this, she is a woman, and no one in-universe gets confused about that. Names also seem universally unisex too. The aforementioned Harold is an example, but there are a bunch of others, like Emma, Emil, Sonia, Cecil, Moses, Denver, Gyeongmi, which is a feminine Korean name, Yoshihide, Rodion, and so on. Most of these characters are female, but the reason for that is because Project Moon often borrows from literature and history, from which most famous figures were male. When they gender swap characters from source literature, they don't often swap the name too. Aside from names and clothes, a good amount of characters are androgynous, or read as a gender they aren't anyway, to the point where I can, ask some friends what gender a series of characters are and come up with different answers each time. Oh wait, I did that, check it out! In general, a great deal of these character designs are androgynous, in large part because of the tailored suits most characters wear, and the fact that names cannot always be used to determine the gender of a character. The only thing that you can really use to know a character's gender is their voice and their pronouns, otherwise it's not easy to find out, because gender, like I've been saying this whole video, is not important to characters in Project Moon's works. But wait a second! What if it actually is? Let me take you on a journey. A journey where I show you that yes, gender actually does have an impact on these games, and some stories are really interesting when looked through the lens of gender. I promise this is interesting. Let's start at the beginning. Angela, Carmen, and Ian have really interesting relations to gender roles as they exist in the real world. Angela, despite being Ian and Benjamin's child, is something that Ian designs to replicate the love of his life. Angela is literally objectified. Ian tells her she is a machine, and he's ashamed of her, but despite that, he decides it's her job to take care of him throughout the time loop in Lobotomy Corporation. There's also the obvious differences in her design versus Carmen's. While Carmen is a skinnier woman, Angela has a much fuller figure. We know that she was designed to be as appealing as possible to everyone, in the same way that women are told to be. Her design is an arguably misogynistic remaking of Carmen. She simultaneously takes the role of caretaker, love interest, and child to Ian, as he makes her suffer through all of his emotional baggage and business needs while she's banned from getting any of the fruits of her labor. Angela is a neglected child, forced to take care of the person who created and neglected her in the first place. Her neglection was in large part due to the fact that she wasn't like the woman Ian loved. Speaking of, Carmen, the mother of all abnormalities, it's almost easy to see how her gender plays into the horror of Lobotomy Corp. She was essentially scooped up from her death and forced to birth every horrible beast from the river of humanity in a basement for 10,000 years. Sure, the other Sephiroth were locked in said basement as well and forced to go about their roles, but Carmen had no body or freedom to move or speak of. She became simplified to her ability to produce, objectified into a bucket to draw water. No wonder she ended up going mad by the end of the plan. Her voice is described as beautiful and warm. Heathcliff, in the Art Knights collab, describes it as sounding almost like Kathy's, the love of his life. Considering the way Carmen convinces people to distort through soft words and gentle prodding, one could consider her almost as the archetype of a temptress. Bit of a stretch? Yeah, probably. How about Roland? We've talked enough about the female characters, I think it's only fair we give the boys a go. Roland is an example of a somewhat common archetype, a man motivated by the death of a woman in his life that causes him to become empty inside and go on a rampage. Specifically here it's his wife, as is quite common. There are too many men in media that fit this description to count, but we'll use John Wick. I know his rampage is motivated by the death of his dog, but his dog was a gift from his dead wife, so it's functionally analogous. John Wick goes on a rampage through man after man to get his revenge on the kid that killed his dog with essentially no hesitation. Even after he kills the kid, it's not enough, so he kills his dad too. There isn't really a moment where Wick stops and considers his brutish actions. He just keeps killing through people until he's done, which makes for a fun enough movie, but it shows how the main character, and by extension the main character's wife, aren't really that deep. At the end of the movie, John Wick adopts another dog, but who's to say he won't just go on another murder spree after some other tragedy? We know he's capable of it, and we know that he hasn't changed all that much. I also haven't seen any of the John Wick films aside from the first one, so I was like, is that actually what happens in the next movies? I genuinely don't know. Is it? Tell me in the comments. Compare and contrast with Roland, who is similar in a lot of ways to Wick. He was a mercenary who often killed people, even before he met his wife. He went on a murderous rampage across the city in search for the persons or persons who killed Angelica, even after he beheaded the direct cause, and his story ends with a climactic final confrontation with the person who indirectly caused Angelica's death. There's a very interesting thing to note with Roland's time in the library though. He jokes with Angela.
힘들었어요? 지쳤어요? 쉬고 싶어요? 배고파요? 나가고 싶어요?
He jokes with Angela, socializes with her, tries to understand her every motive. He even offers to take her out for dinner in the back streets. Obviously, this is a cover, but I think there's more to it than that. In Roland's bad ending, he says, "You can't just put an end to it, Angela." He doesn't say, "You don't deserve to live," or "This is what all my hatred has led to." He's saying that the cycle of vengeance and violence must keep going. It can't be stopped by Angela or Roland. Throughout Ruina, he tries to make friends with her and the patron librarians. He looks for every excuse he can to convince himself not to kill her. Because he's been told by his friend after Angelica died that his rampaging isn't worth it, it doesn't help, and he knows that's true. As he's learned more and more about the library, he became more and more reluctant to carry out his plan, even considering himself Angela's friend in the ending where he kills her. But in his bad ending, he thinks he's come this far, and if he doesn't finish his plan, then all of his killings would be for nothing. This is obviously, first and foremost, a deconstruction of violence and revenge, and how revenge even moves people who don't want to participate in it. But it can also be seen as a deconstruction of the vengeful widower trope that is so common in a lot of media. Instead of achieving his vengeance and becoming fulfilled, he subverts that common ending before it even happens. This is in large part because of Angela, a woman, showing him that he doesn't have to do this. And, in my opinion, the most explicit representation of gender roles in Project Moon, Shiomi Yoru, Ryoshu's mother. She was deliberately captured and chained in the House of Spiders because she didn't have the needed aptitude to become the Qianxia star. She was close, but not close enough. So the Fingers ignored her talents and specialities and treated her as a womb to push out what they actually wanted. We know that she didn't want a kid. We know that she was pregnant. There are only a few ways those things can both be true, and I strongly doubt that it was an accident. Shiomi's actions towards Ryoshu also stink of postpartum depression. She's more neglectful and depressed than any of the other nurse fathers. Where the others want to connect, she wants to detach. The other nurse fathers were casted here for reasons unrelated to the project itself. Shiomi is the only person who is here by no fault of her own, not because of the consequences of her actions, but because of the consequences of her blood. She, like many women, is objectified for the offspring she can produce. That trauma trickles downwards too. Araya is feted, just as Shiomi was, but this time instead of being feted for the purpose of creating a child, she was there to reel back her mother. The bond between mother and daughter was abused to shape Ryoshu into an object the Fingers can use to cut away anything they don't like. Once again, objectification. Less explicit than the objectification that happens to Shiomi, but objectification nonetheless. Let's look at the other female nurse father. I actually didn't think that Valencina had enough gender coding in her character to justify a section here, but Puffberry, an awesome YouTuber, you should check her stuff out, gave interesting insights which I'm going to share and expand on here. Valencina is very traditionally masculine in attitude, being essentially the exact opposite of a nurturing mother. She's been shaped by the masculine influence of the thumb into that role, and then she was put back into the House of Spiders to act as a nurturer anyway. She's also, aside from Rian, the person who loves Ryoshu most in the House of Spiders. Now that might sound insane considering her abuse, but what I'm talking about is her internal feelings. She justifies her violence against Ryoshu and Lucio as tough love to make them stronger. And while she does see Ryoshu as a ticket and Lucio as a textbook, she shows genuine despair when her apprentice dies, unlike most of the other nurse fathers. She is a demonstration of how a hyper-masculine system like the thumb can turn even genuine feelings of care into abuse and trauma. The fact that they show this through Valencina, a woman, is very interesting, I think, because it shows how these gender roles are just roles. Oh yeah, gender roles. They still sort of exist within the DNA of the city. It's just now these roles that were previously sorted by gender exist more as a social distinction. A man could be a homemaker, a woman can be a career person, but these roles do still exist within Project Moon's world. That's why I can even make this video. Those borders that divide characters into masculine and feminine may not discriminate, but they still exist. Let's talk about fan service. There are definitely sexualized designs for female characters in Project Moon's works, but hear me out. I don't think this is a bad thing. In isolation it sounds bad, but within the context of the rest of the games, I would actually argue that sexualization is utilized not for titillation, but for narrative. I'm mainly going to be focusing on Limbus here with a bit of Ruina mixed in too, but I want to clarify something first. No, a woman having visible cleavage or large breasts isn't fan service. Women like that just exist, and if you think such a thing is fan service, then that's a problem. It's fine to find those features attractive, but claiming they are sexual by themselves is engaging in the male gaze, which I will not do here. When it comes to sexualization of men or women, it's more about presentation, where the eyes are drawn, the poses and expression the person makes, what they say, and so on. Project Moon, in my view, is fairly even across male and female characters when it comes to showing skin, but that's not the only aspect to sexualization. For example, these CGs are not sexualized, even though they have cleavage. A person could find them attractive, but that isn't the intent. Versus this CG, which I would argue is meant to be at least somewhat sexually appealing. The overhead camera allows for a better view of the cleavage, as well as placing it close to the location of the face, which is generally the focus of identity CGs. I think this CG is probably the most intentionally sexualized piece of art that Project Moon has ever produced, and even then it's pretty tame. So when I talk about sexualized designs, it's going to be fairly subjective. From having a look at the many character designs across the game, I think Project Moon sexualizes women slightly more than men, but usually has thematic, interesting, or otherwise unique reasons for doing so. This ID, for instance, has an excellent reason for showing more skin than most do. Dulcinea, whom this ID represents, is objectified as something to look at, an attraction at the parade to be appealing. She's also very traditionally attractive. She's very tall, thin, and dressed in a very feminine outfit, complete with a corset and parasol. The parasol is a very clever addition to the outfit, as they are designed to block out the sun to prevent aging of the skin. It also works with the vampire motif of being burnt by the sun, genuinely an inspired choice for a weapon, combining both motifs of vampirism and beauty standards. Okay, what about a significantly racier example? Don Quixote's middle identity, specifically her uptype 3 art. I think this one is a bit less justified, especially when most of the other male middle sinners don't have their whole torso out. I think it still works fine when you consider that middle Don Quixote was one of the very first middle identities to be in the game, released when we saw the middle for the very first time. It makes perfect sense that they would want to show off the tattoos on the 3-star to make the iconography of the finger much more distinct from more common syndicates that have the same Hawaiian shirt vibes, like the Ting Tang Gang. It's still fan service, but considering the other female middle units don't have the same level of exposure, and they're much newer, I don't think I'm too off the mark here. This is a problem the first uptight art avoids. Her torso is fully visible and you can see that her shirt is open, but the sparkles around her head and the lighting draw attention to her face. My overall verdict is, yeah, Middle Dawn is sexualized, a bit more so than needed, but the focus on her body in the uptight 3 art isn't solely about how she looks hot, but how the power of her tattoos gives her strength. I still think it's a little much, but at least they got Heathcliff's clips out for his middle ID. All is fair. Oh yeah, Heathcliff. To make this section fair, we've now got to talk about our lovely male sinners too. Unlike other media, men have a propensity to show almost as much skin as women do in Limbus, especially Heathcliff for some reason. Like, look at his Kurokomo ID. His shirt is buttoned way down in his center focus, and he literally says, "Take a gander at my tats." Like, it's not subtle, he didn't have to abbreviate tattoos, it saves one syllable, he knows what he is. His middle ID, too, shows off. Aside from his coat, he's completely shirtless and throwing hands, though I will say the focus isn't on his body in the same way his Kurokomo CG was, but on the crazed expression on his face. Although there is lighting highlighting his chest, the focus is on his eyes. Although it's mainly Heathcliff, there are a handful of other male sinners with more skin exposed too. Kurokomo Honglu is a good example, but one I want to focus on is Mola Sinclair. Like middle Heathcliff before him, he's got his whole tummy out, but with nowhere near as much musculature as the former identity. Once again, the light in his uptype 3 highlights his chest, a common theme across most identities where a sinner's chest is exposed. The focus of the art is on the goggles, what with the reflection of the light from it, and also on his weapon, surrounded by gross green goop. You'll notice that, like the female sinners, the male sinner art isn't solely focused on their showing of skin, but often on their expressions and weapons. This is really good, because it shows that they have the same standard for both men and women, and they aren't just showing men's bodies off to balance the scales between them. Overall, I think this shows that while Project Moon willingly engages in fan service, the art wherein the sinners are sexualized tends to focus not just on the sexualization itself, but on other aspects of the characters that make them look cool. Like Middle Dawn's tattoos, Dulcinea's Rhodion's parasol and outfit, and Kurokomo Ishmael's sword. Additionally, there are male IDs that arguably have some amount of sexualization too, and while not as many as the female IDs, their presence still indicates a fairness in Project Moon's writing that I think is great. Oh yeah, and the other thing is that for every sexualized female design, there's about 10 that aren't. And that's the most important thing. It's good to not needlessly sexualize women, but it's better to allow women to be sexy so long as they're treated the same way narratively and it's not overwhelming. I think Project Moon does this excellently. Okay, it's time for the woke Dante pronoun rant. Everyone sit down and listen, thank you, thank you. I get somewhat irritated when I go to certain places online and I see people using he/him pronouns for Dante instead of they/them. It's just so common, and I think it's sort of dumb. So we're gonna ace this honey rapid fire some reasons I've heard that people do this, and then I'm gonna debunk them because it's my video. Dante is a self-insert, so they can use whatever pronouns I do. Objection! Are you serious? The very first moments we get with Dante show how they're their own character. They're rude, loud, and arrogant. The only reason this is something that people say is because Dante currently has amnesia. Through Dante we learn about the city, but when they get their memory back, they won't be the player behind the screen, they'll be their own person. Dante is an audience surrogate, not an audience insert. Even with amnesia, Dante has their own character traits and arc. They are an unconfident newbie who slowly learns around their co-workers to try to help them through their problems. They are distinctly their own character. This argument doesn't make any sense. Dante has a masculine name and build. It's only natural that I use he/him pronouns. Objection! Oh, well, so does this character, and this one, and this one, and this one. By those standards, we should call all these characters he/him too, right? Come on. Fuck, there's even a female character named Dante in Library of Verona. It's so obvious why this is wrong. Who cares? Dante's not going to be revealed as non-binary as a human. They/them is only used to keep their gender ambiguous, so it doesn't matter what pronouns I use. Own it! That's not the point. Dante's been exclusively and universally referred to as they/them. If what you were saying were true, then the game could use he/him and then later reveal them to be a woman, or vice versa. The fact of the matter is, referring to them as any sort of gender pronoun has at least a 50% chance of being inaccurate down the road, which is the major reason the game avoids it, and why you should avoid it too. Also, if Dante was referred to with she/her pronouns in dialogue, everyone in the fandom would use she/her. If Dante was referred to with he/him, everyone would use that. I don't understand why the same logic doesn't apply to they/them, especially when other gendered pronouns are never used. I should also clarify that I'm not talking about headcanons, fanfictions, fanarts, or anything like that. Make as many human Dantes with whatever genders you like. I just think that when discussing the actual content of the game within the context of being accurate to the source material, you should just use they/them pronouns. It's really not that hard. I get that once Dante's identity is revealed, they'll likely be either male or female. I get that they're not canonically non-binary, but they only are referred to with they/them pronouns. Using any other pronoun is just as inaccurate as calling Honglu she/her or Rodion he/him. Okay, that's all on Dante. Let's move on to other queer or queer adjacent stuff. Project Moon is yet to have any explicitly queer characters in their media. That's not a critique, it's just a fact. I understand the politics of South Korea are way different, and the last time Project Moon was accused of being feminist, people got death threats and all sorts of nasty things. So I'm not gonna be like, Rotus should kiss women now, or whatever, but it'd still be nice to have something explicit, aside from Wonderlab, which we will get to. Until then, we have a few implicit cases as well as some interesting stuff on non-binary gender. Ishmael and Queequeg had a very intimate relationship that can easily be read as romantic. Queequeg, during her time in the pallid whale's stomach, held on to hope only by remembering the colour of the sunset, the colour of Ishmael's hair. She held on to life by hoping to see Ishmael again. Ishmael likewise feels very strongly towards her too. The first thing she does when she sees Queequeg is rush and hold her in a tight embrace. Ishmael, the one so careful and so cautious, immediately disregards her more neurotic tendencies to hug someone that she can see has begun the process of pallidification. Ishmael talks about Queequeg's scars, about wounds only she knew of. We can see the scars on Queequeg's body very easily, so the only way Ishmael could know about other wounds is if she's literally seen more of her. And the last piece of evidence for Ishmael and Queequeg's relationship being romantic is when Queequeg reveals her past association with the middle to Ishmael, something that is considered improper to do as a sailor. Ishmael is immediately happy to forgive Queequeg, to encourage her not to cut herself up anymore, and talks about what their future could be like after they get off the ship. Queequeg shares her past with Ishmael, and Ishmael offers to share her future back. Ishmael says she doesn't care what they spend time doing, fishing, fighting, doing any job, as long as they are together. That reads to me as much more than platonic. But I'm sure you've heard all this before, or come to this conclusion on your own. But something that distinguishes it, I think, is just how beautiful and heartbreaking their relationship is. A lot of media treats gay relationships as a minor, small character quirk that isn't important, but here, these emotions are treated with the exact same seriousness and importance to Ishmael's arcs as Heathcliff's relationship to Cathy is in the following canto. Ishmael and Queequeg's relationship has joy, love, hope, spite, anger, heartbreak. Even if you read it as platonic, these emotions are all still there. The only reason why this is an excellent queer representation is because it's not explicitly stated as queer. Think about it, if the only thing that changed is Ishmael calling herself Queequeg's girlfriend, and vice versa, essentially nothing about the narrative itself would need to change. It's like anti-queer baiting. In most cases of queer baiting, a gay relationship is teased constantly but is never actualized. Here the relationship exists, and it's borderline canon that it's romantic, it's just the terms girlfriend and romance aren't used. It's very interesting, I think. There are other vibes you could argue as queer between characters, like Shren and Rand's, but I don't think that any relationship deserves as much dissection as Queequeg's and Ishmael's, so it's non-binary time. Woohoo! Non-binary time! Project Moon sort of kind of has non-binary characters, but not really. So far, all non-binary or gender-ambiguous characters in Project Moon have been characters with very non-human designs, apart from Wonderlab, which we'll get to later, but not all characters with non-human designs are non-binary. This is a bit of a problem. A very common and bad trope in media is the amorphous, genderless, androgynous kind of character, wherein gender doesn't apply because the character is an alien, robot, or otherwise non-human. A character like this is fine on its own. The problem is when non-binary characters are restricted to these non-human characters. Project Moon at least softens the blow somewhat by allowing more non-human-like characters to be male and female too, and clarifying that even if a character is mechanical looking or otherwise doesn't look human, they are ultimately sourced from a human fleshy body. It's still a bad trope though, and even if its bad edges are softened, they aren't flat out removed. Especially when, in Runa's art book, these characters' genders aren't listed as N or X, but a question mark, implying not that their gender is distinct, but that it is unknown. Nonetheless, I will be calling them non-binary from here on, maybe because of wishful thinking, even though the term I should probably be using is gender ambiguous. From an in-universe perspective, the fact that we haven't seen any more fleshy non-binary characters makes me wonder if there is an expectation or culture for non-binary people to end up getting body replacement surgeries or otherwise transitioning to a non-human look. Or if that non-human look is more likely to just get you identified as non-binary. In any case, I do think this is a weakness of Project Moon. Like I said before, me stating these robotic characters are non-binary is really just wishful thinking, when canonically they're more likely to simply be gender ambiguous. Gender ambiguous characters are fine, but I would like explicitly non-binary characters too, especially more human-looking ones. In terms of gender and romance, this is the biggest weakness Project Moon has. Okay, fine, let's talk about Wonderlab. Before its decanonization, Wonderlab was the only representation we had of gender-ambiguous, human-looking characters. Every character in the series had an unspecified gender aside from Abnormalities and Angela. This was really cool, but since it's no longer part of the canon, I don't really want to talk about it that much. It's great that it existed, but I am a little upset that Project Moon wanted these characters' genders to be specified if they appeared in any later projects, especially considering they had no problem with unspecified characters if they looked like robots. I'd have a longer section on Wonderlab if it was still canon, but it's not, so I don't want to write it. Anyhow, that's the video. Despite the downer ending, I think that Project Moon handles gender and gender roles really, really well. I just hope that in the future they can be better about their non-binary representation. Thanks for watching the woke channel with the woke